What's up? Welcome to the Sauced Up Tier List UFC edition. Today I'm going to be discussing the fighters that might be on that good stuff. They may be sauced up. You know exactly what I'm talking about. Some of these guys have literally popped, and we know that they've taken stuff. Some of them I am very suspicious of. Now, before we get into this, guys, I just want to make this clear at the start of the video. I'm not someone that obsesses over this or gets too deep into the weeds all over this stuff. I'm just making this video because it'll be fun. And there are some fighters that you just have to bring up as they're probably on something. But at the same time, I'm aware that if these people are probably on something, they're not the only ones. There are plenty of UFC fighters that don't have all the telltale signs that could be on stuff. There are some fighters that may have some signs and may not be on stuff. I ultimately don't care too much because it would ruin my enjoyment of the sport to just say, oh, this guy's only winning because he's on shit. It's like his opponents could be on shit. Most people in the UFC could be on shit, or it could be the opposite. Maybe not everyone's on stuff. So don't take this as I'm taking away from these fighters' work. Again, being on sauce is not just going to make you a great fighter. There's a lot of other stuff that goes into it, and you'll see that throughout this video. Anyway, let's just get into it. Going up in the S tier, I'm just going to say, maybe not the S tier, but I'll say very suspicious tier, Josh Emmett. Josh Emmett has gyno that you could see from 100 miles away. I call him the gyno gladiator, the gyno goblin. And Josh Emmett has a telltale sign, and he also happens to have some of the nastiest power we've ever seen in the featherweight division, which is a weight class where people usually don't carry that type of power because of how light they are. I'm not saying Josh Emmett is a small person. He's pretty dense, but at the same time, it's just a coincidence that he happens to have some of the most suspicious gyno in the UFC, and I don't know, his power is on par with it. Okay, so I'm going to have to say Josh Emmett is a very suspicious guy when it comes to his gyno. Next up, I'm just going to have to say it. What's more suspicious than gyno? Droopage in one part of your chest only. Israel Adesanya has the most suspicious gyno I've ever seen in my entire life. I don't know how it's possible that in his early 30s, long after puberty, this guy would show up with a boob on one pec only. All right, that means that there's a whole lot of imbalance going on in this guy's hormones. He tried to blame it on weed. There's just no way. Listen, weed might give you a little bit of estrogen. It may give you a little bit of a puffy nipple shit going on, but it's not going to give you this look. I mean, look at this, man. It's drooping down 100 yards. I don't think Adesanya is necessarily on shit right now. I mean, if you look at his performance when he showed up with a boob, it happened to be his most impressive performance ever. And a part of that is because he's just really solid and he was hungry and Costa motivated him to get up for that fight. He was also in his prime and Costa's just not that good. And Adesanya, I believe, always beats Paulo Costa's ass. But he had nasty power in that fight. And he had a fucking boob. The second he walked out, I was like, what the hell is this? What is going on? All right, and where's Paulo Costa out? Let me get Costa on this list. I'm going to put Costa in the very suspicious tier. Now, people are going to roll their eyes and say, oh, how do you say Izzy's in the S tier, not Paulo Costa? Just because you're jacked does not necessarily mean you're on sauce. Now, let me just say this, okay? Let me just say this. I'm going to put Yoel in this tier too. It's not just about how you look. There are some fighters in the UFC that don't look impressive that could be on stuff. I mean, look at athletes like Lance Armstrong. You don't have to be big to be on sauce. And for example, Sean O'Malley and his buddy Kyler Phillips have popped in the past. If you guys don't remember, O'Malley served a 2-year suspension. I think Kyler Phillips recently served about a year suspension for taking something, I believe it was called Ostarine. They don't look that impressive as fighters. Now, Kyler Phillips was like so explosive in his fights with Song Yadong where he beat Song, and you could see like, damn, maybe he's kind of declined a little bit as far as his quick twitch ability, but both of those guys don't look all that impressive. But they have literally popped before. Does that mean that they're on stuff now? Not necessarily. In the same way that Adesanya has never popped, but that fight with Costa, dude, come on. He must have been on stuff. Does that mean he's on sauce right now? Not exactly. He might not be. He's not looked as physically impressive in some of his other fights. He's not showed up with a boob in some of his other fights. And, he's not had the same speed. So there's a chance that he has declined a little bit in his physicality. Maybe because he got off the sauce. And when you get off the sauce, your hormones decline below the normal levels that they were at before you hopped on. But back to Yoel Romero and Paulo Costa. I think it's very possible to look like Yoel and Paulo Costa naturally. Okay? But where it gets suspicious is looking like Yoel and Paulo Costa as a professional mixed martial arts fighter. In Yoel's case, he used to be an Olympic wrestler. If you're just a guy that has phenomenal genetics and you lift weights, you can look like Yoel Romero. Same thing with Paulo Costa. You have to have insane genetics, obviously. But the fact that these guys have good cardio and they're always grappling and hitting pads and doing a bunch of endurance work, that's where it gets weird. In Yoel's case, the fact that he still looks so crazy at an old age also could be a sign. But if you know Mike O'Hearn, I don't know if you guys know who Mike O'Hearn is. Mike O'Hearn is this guy that claims natty in the fitness industry. It's a total joke at this point. I mean, here's a photo of him. You know this guy's on some shit. But his argument to defend himself, because he won't just admit it, is, listen, I've been lifting for 30 years. All right? You know anyone on sauce? You know anyone on PEDs that's been doing it for 30 years and can maintain their strength and their look? No, these guys always come crashing down eventually. There's something to be said about that. Mike O'Hearn is much more unnatural compared to Yoel Romero, absolutely. And Yoel Romero's physicality, the way that he does all of his flips, and he's just a freak athlete in general. Without the sauce, he'd be a crazy athlete. And yeah, he looks great in his 40s. I don't think you can take sauce consistently for that long and not have some bad side effects unless you have elite genetics. There are some guys that can take it for 30 years and not have bad side effects. So Mike O'Hearn, you're on sauce, but you're just genetically gifted too. With Yoel, I'm not 100% convinced, okay? Like, this guy is a special athlete. His durability in and of itself is one of the things that lets me believe that he could not be on something, because sauce, it'll help you recover fast, but it won't necessarily give you like an inhuman chin. You know what I mean? So Yoel, I'm suspicious of because, he was on the Cuban Olympic team and he's competing at an insanely high level in his 40s when most guys' testosterone starts to plummet. And even though he's been looking amazing for a long time, he could just have really good genetics to where he's not going to crash from being on stuff for a long time. His health would be just fine. And Paulo Costa is a similar case. You could look like him naturally if you have great genetics and you train, but for him, he has good cardio. All right, let's get on to the next one. Holly Holm, in her 40s, has capped delts, super jacked as a female. It's one thing if you have great genetics and you're a girl and you happen to put on a little bit more muscle, but for Holly, it's like this lean, dry look. You know what I mean? That she just happens to be able to maintain often. Women in general have a harder time getting super lean because they just store more fat for hormonal reasons. But in Holly's case, it's like she's always very lean. And she has like a vascularity and her neck is huge. I mean, I don't know. I think it's very suspicious. Usman or Magomedov? I think, well, listen, he popped and he's literally serving a suspension right now. So there's nothing more we need to say about it. That's just how it is. Jose Aldo. I think Jose Aldo is going to have to make this list just because of how suspicious looking his delts are. All right, Jose Aldo's back, his delts. There's a certain 3D look to him that it just kind of sounds the alarm a little bit, right? For example, it's one thing if you're lean and you have like some delts that are popping when you have a pump. But in Aldo's case, you look at him in the cage, his delts are literally like boulders popping out of his shoulders. Of course, he's just super explosive and fast twitch, and that's genetic too. Again, all of these guys that look really impressive, if they were natural, they might literally be natural too. Even if they're on sauce, if they were natty, they could still look impressive due to their genetics. I'm sure Aldo is really genetically gifted, but there's just something about his physique. But I'm not going to say high suspicion because, again, I just think that he might be He might just be really gifted genetically. Movsar Evloev, dude. So let me just explain this. I think Movsar is very suspicious. Movsar competed with Arnold Allen recently, and Arnold Allen is a really big, jacked featherweight. But Arnold Allen in the cage, he's like a very wide guy. He has a wide structure. Evloev has a little bit more narrow shoulders, but Allen looks very natural. You know, his muscularity is a little bit more flat from his weight cut, from all the training he's doing. There's just something a lot more natty about Arnold Allen's look. Evloev has this like filled out, shredded, dry, insanely vascular look. Very full. You go through a harsh weight cut. You're doing all this endurance training. In Evloev's case, he has great cardio. He's constantly grappling. And I know that grappling gives you like a pretty good physique. You have to be very strong. A lot of wrestlers have really strenuous strength and conditioning routines. But for Evloev, I don't know. There's usually a bit of a give and a take. This is the thing about Aldo. And the same thing with Yoel, for example. With Yoel and Aldo, those guys are insanely jacked, but they never had great gas tanks, right? Yoel always had to be low output, and he always had to manage his gas tank because he would gas out. Usually when you have a ton of muscle, the consequence to that is you'll have lactic acid buildup, and your muscles will feel heavy as soon as you really start to work hard and throw a bunch of punches and stuff like that. The same thing with Aldo. Wasn't known for having like the best gas tank. Kind of slowed down in the later rounds of his 5-rounder fights. But for Evloev, he's just, from the moment the fight starts to the very end of it, on point with his gas tank. He has like a very high output style as well. Capped delts. There's just something weird with Evloev's physique. Next up, we have Aleski dos Santos. Has literally popped in the past. So I'm not just like, you know, right now I'm very sure that he has been on stuff in the past. He has telltale signs, capped delts, massive traps, which are usually a part of the body that has a lot of androgenic receptors, to where if you hop on stuff, those are usually one of the first muscles to blow up a lot. I'm not sure if he's on sauce right now, but in the past when he was fighting, he's knocked out Strickland, for example. This is the guy that beat the fuck out of Benoit Saint-Denis. He not only had tons of power, but he also had really good cardio and a great gas tank. So William Knight. I have to say William Knight. I'm sorry. I think he's in the S tier. William Knight is far too jacked to not be on stuff. And there is something to be said about his atrocious gas tank. This guy, like after he throws a few combinations, starts huffing and puffing, and he looks like he can barely move. But he has like 25-inch arms. All right. He literally looks like an off-season professional bodybuilder. For sure. I mean, you could say again, horrible gas tank. He might just have insane genetics. I'm sure he has insane genetics, but explain the gyno. All right. Explain the gyno as well. You know, he's comically massive. Comically massive. He's probably on shit. I think he benches 4+ plates. And for a martial artist, that's kind of nuts. All right. Now, again, there are people that get on sauce that will never bench 4 plates. But as a pro MMA fighter in the UFC, you're benching 4 plates, you have gyno, and you have like the physique of an off-season IFBB pro. Something's going on. Next up, John Jones. Literally has popped in the past. The UFC literally had to move an event for this guy. Okay? They had to move an entire UFC event to a whole other location. They had to rent a whole other stadium for John Jones because he was pulsating picograms. All right. And the Athletic Commission in Las Vegas could not allow him to compete in the state of Nevada. And so they had to literally move. Okay. Brian Ortega, I'm going to put him in the literally pop tier. After his UFC debut, he popped and served a suspension. So he's got to be in that tier as well. Josh Quinlan has literally popped after his first UFC fight. He served a long suspension. And now we must get back to some people that are very suspicious. Merab Dvalishvili. CEO of EPO, maybe. Okay. Now, let me just say this. You could be on all the EPO in the world. You're never going to have a gas tank like Merab. Part of that is just genetic, right? Demetrius Johnson was asking Merab about his cardio routine and whatnot. And it's like, there's just no fucking point. Yes. You know, let me take that back. Obviously, Merab's style of training helps him with his cardio. If he's not training well, he doesn't have the same gas tank. But You can take all of his advice, you'll never have his gas tank. You can take all the sauce you want, you'll never have his gas tank. He's just a freak. So credit to Merab, just like credit to all these other good fighters that have done good stuff. Adesanya showing up with a boob still had a great performance because he was really skilled. But especially when we know there's a high likelihood that at the highest level in any sport, people are taking stuff. You're going to tell me that the guy with the most freakish gas tank we've ever seen, you could bring up TJ Dillashaw, who popped for stuff in the past, like EPO. You could bring up other guys. None of them have a gas tank like Merab. You're telling me that this is not suspicious? Again, I don't really care. I'm not getting into the weeds with all this. I'm not going to ruin my enjoyment of the sport. I'm not going to look at Merab versus O'Malley and be like, well, Merab's on stuff and O'Malley's probably... It's just a stylistic thing as well. But come on. Merab's not even the most skilled grappler. He's not even the most skilled striker. He's actually probably not top 5 in any of those categories in his division, but he destroys people because of his cardio. He might be on shit. Okay? I know he's born in an elevated area in Georgia. He may have a third lung, but I cannot help but put him on this list. Vitor Petrino. I'm putting him on the S tier, okay? People talk about TRT Vitor. TRT Vitor is a small fry compared to Vitor Petrino. And they've literally competed in the same division. Now, to be fair, Vitor spent a lot of time in his career at middleweight. But Vitor Petrino looks like he could be competing in the Olympia for classic physique if he just cuts maybe a few more pounds. Now, once again, if this was a guy that only lifted weights, that was the only thing that he did, and he just ate like 5 meals a day, I'd be like, all right, he could be natural. He could just have insane genetics. 100%. But there's a bunch of things that go into this. He's an MMA fighter that does a lot of cardio work and does a lot of strength and conditioning, and he's hitting pads, and he doesn't even have that bad of a gas tank. He has a pretty good gas tank. I think he's on shit, all right? This guy's quads are insane. His physique is crazy. So, yeah, I think that Vitor is probably on shit. And again, with these Brazilian fighters, let me just say this. I don't think USADA or whoever's testing these days loves going to Brazil, all right? There are just some areas that people are going to want to avoid. It's harder to find people. Just like, imagine this. It's really good to avoid USADA if you're training in the mountains in Mexico, and Yair Rodriguez happened to be out of the cage for like a year and a half at one point, and no one knew why, and he happened to be training in the mountains in the middle of nowhere. All right, it's going to be hard to find some of these guys. The UFC and USADA, they have no issue finding O'Malley. They have no issue finding Kyler Phillips in Arizona. It's going to be a little bit harder to find where Vitor's at. And even if you know where he's at, you don't want to go to the favelas. All right, he might not even live in the favelas, but where does he live? I don't know, but it might be near there. For someone like O'Malley and Kyler Phillips that have literally popped in the past, the UFC has no issue going to Arizona, wherever they're at in Arizona. No issue. Usman or Magomedov, I mean, might be a little bit harder to catch people in Dagestan, but at the same time, he trains at AKA. And I'm pretty sure that's where he probably popped. Same thing with Jones and Ortega and Quinlan. And that kind of brings me to this. Jailton Almeida literally lives in the favelas. Jailton Almeida is not getting caught by USADA, but he happens to be the most suspicious guy in the UFC. If there's anyone that I would bet is probably on shit, it's Jailton Almeida. Okay? Jailton is in his early 30s, and he looks like he's 50 years old. His face looks like it's made out of leather. His head has literally grown over the years. I'm going to try to pull up an old photo of him on screen where he was much skinnier and his head was smaller. And you look at these photos of Jailton Almeida. Again, we talk about Vitor Petrino and how he mogs TRT Vitor back in the day, and how if he lost like 10 more pounds and he got a little bit leaner, he could compete. Jailton Almeida on the Dana White Contender Series or cutting down to 205 would be a bodybuilder. Jailton Almeida is like 220 pounds after cutting a lot of weight to get down to 205, and he looks like this. He looks like he's dry, he's full, he's shredded to the fucking gills, and now he's at heavyweight. And, sometimes people put on a lot of fat and they look much less impressive. And sometimes if you have really good genetics, you'll get lean and you look kind of saucy, but then you start to bulk up and people realize, oh, it's actually just his insertions when they're lean and there's not a lot of fat on them. That makes him look impressive. But with Jailton, he puts on fat and everything just blows up even more. I have to say that Jailton Almeida is on stuff, okay? Again, most endurance athletes with great cardio and whatnot, and I'm not saying UFC fighters are just endurance athletes. They have to be explosive, but the cardio that you need to go a hard 5 rounds taking down Derek Lewis, you know, you're probably not going to have that much of a full look. You're going to be a little bit drained, a little bit stringy. Even if you have a lot of muscle, Jailton Almeida just simply looks too full, too dry to dismiss. Kamaru Usman, very suspicious, all right? Some people might say that he should be in the S tier. People bring up acne all the time with Usman. Acne on his stomach, acne on his back. First of all, acne is not always the sign. There are plenty of people that are natural that have acne. I have a bunch of acne on my back in the winter. As soon as the summer hits and I get more sunlight and I clean up my diet a little bit, I have literally zero acne. And I look a lot more impressive in the summer because I'm leaner and I'm more active in the gym, right? But in the winter, I am less active in the gym. I don't look as impressive, but I have acne. And that's just how it is sometimes. Acne is not a thing that people only have when they're like going through puberty or they're 18. There are plenty of people in the UFC that have acne that are not on anything. Kamaru could be that guy. But then you talk about like the dots on his stomach, which is always a little bit of a weird thing. You look at people like Jailton and guys that are very lean, and whenever they have like bubbly dots on their stomach, it's a little bit strange, okay? Because that is a common injection site for people that take HGH. And then you think about his dad being a corrupt pharmacist. So if you don't know about that, Kamaru Usman's dad was a pharmacist that happened to be a corrupt pharmacist and spent many years in jail for it. So there's also that. And Usman also has some of the craziest cardio that we've ever seen, and he happens to be jacked, okay? And he was also knocking dudes out in his prime. So Usman is very suspicious, and people say that his head has grown too. I don't know how accurate that is. I'm just not ready to put him in the S tier. I'm not ready. I don't know why. I just don't think that there's enough. Like, people bring up the knees, for example, and they say Usman has horrible knees. He's always been hurting on them. I usually call them wobblestone, cobblestone knees because they are very wobbly and they almost look like they're made out of cobblestones. But people act like, oh, how does he have a great gas tank, but he can't run? Because he's always talking about, I can't run. When I walk on grass, it hurts. I don't think running is the best cardio for MMA, right? The best cardio for MMA, and people that actually train and compete will probably agree with this, is hitting pads really hard, sparring hard, okay, or at a high pace, at least sparring at a high pace, and grappling, doing a lot of grappling work, just actually going through the motions that you would use in a fight, but doing it for long periods of time, going hard. If you run, for example, and you're like a long distance runner and you like doing your 10, 15 miles, you'll have a good gas tank for sure. But if you're not used to hitting pads, and you try to hit pads hard for 5 minutes, you'll be completely winded. Just because it's a totally different style of cardio. It's very explosive. It's high intensity interval training. It's just different. And it is possible that Usman, even though he doesn't run, he can still do a lot of bike, elliptical stuff, and he could just train really hard on the pads and just spar hard. It is possible. And again, I don't think acne is a telltale sign, but then you have the corrupt pharmacist. So, you know what? Maybe. But also, let me just say this. Being a corrupt pharmacist doesn't, like, first of all, I may not know enough about the situation, but being a corrupt pharmacist does not mean his dad was, like, teaching people how to use sauce, okay? I just don't know how true it is that just because his dad was a corrupt pharmacist in some way means that part of his corruption was, like, getting a bunch of shit for his sons and teaching them how to use stuff and get away with it. So I'll just say that. But, you know, maybe. There's like a ton of telltale signs. There's a ton of them. All right. Being jacked, having that type of gas tank, it is very suspicious. And then he has the bubbles on his stomach. So for the benefit of the doubt for you guys that are suspicious of him, I'll say, all right, I could see it. And that's why he's in the very suspicious tier. I don't know if I'm ready to put him in the S tier. Like, I think showing up with one boob is more suspicious. I'm going to be honest. I think Jailton Almeida is more suspicious. I think Vitor Petrino has to be on shit. Okay, if he's an MMA fighter. If he's an MMA fighter, of course. Again, if he was just a bodybuilder. Same thing with Yoel Romero. Same thing with Jailton Almeida. If these guys were just lifting weights and they weren't doing all of this cardio work, it'd be much easier to believe that they could be natty. Because I know that when you have really good genetics, like, you know, you could look crazy. You could look crazy. Look at Ronnie Coleman, for example. Best bodybuilder ever. You're telling me this guy wouldn't look more impressive than everyone on this list if he was natty? I believe it. Like, Ronnie Coleman said that he didn't start taking stuff until, I think, the mid-90s. And if you look at photos of him in the early 90s when he first started competing, anyone in the right mind would say, if they don't know who he is, anyone in the right mind would be like, yeah, he's on steroids. He's on steroids. I just don't understand why he would lie about when he hopped on, because he's very honest about, oh, yeah, I got on this day. I remember it was this person at this event that told me about this stuff, and I started taking it. He's honest about that. Why would he lie? And also, if someone can get to this level of a look, then they are genetically gifted. Imagine how crazy they would look if they're natural. They would look much more impressive than a bunch of people that are on sauce. Again, it goes back to the whole, just because you're on sauce does not mean you're going to be the best athlete. It doesn't mean you're going to have the most impressive look. So it's possible that Kamaru Usman, just looks-wise, could be natty, but he happens to have the corrupt pharmacist stat and, you know, the crazy gas tank, the bubbles on his stomach. But Vitor doesn't have as crazy of a gas tank as Usman, so fuck it. I'll put Usman in the S tier. Next up, Basil Hoffus. Dude, I mean, Jack Della Maddalena has a crazy physique. All right, JDM's pretty massive for the welterweight division. And I know that the lighting in this photo is a little bit different, but Basil Hoffus still is way more jacked than Jack Della Maddalena. His gas tank is crazy. He took a fight on short notice with him, and he just would not really slow down all that much in that fight. Fought with a very high pace. Apparently, he wasn't tested going into it, and you can check that online. He might be on some shit. I'm not going to lie. He might be on some shit. Next up, we have another gyno gladiator, Dan Ige. Outside of the gyno, there's not a whole lot that makes me suspicious of Dan Ige, but he happens to have some crazy gyno. No one really talks about this as well. Same thing with Josh Emmett, but this type of gyno is usually a telltale sign, all right? This is like sauce gyno. And he happens to have ridiculous knockout power. I would even say he's up there with Josh Emmett and Ilia Topuria as far as his power goes. Maybe a little bit less, but he's one of the only guys that's really laying people out with one punch in that division. So it is also just something to bring up. Loic Radzhabov, S tier. Loic Radzhabov looks like he's a mule, honestly, at this point. This guy just beat Al Salwati, who beat George Hardwick on the Contender Series, and I was picking Al Salwati. And Loic Radzhabov is super slow. He's like lethargic when he fights. He's plotty, but this guy has like the hunchback of Notre Dame. And I don't know, there's something about this guy. He looks like he's 60. No, not 60. He looks like he's 50. He's only like 33. So I just think he's probably on some shit. Okay, he's like a lab experiment. Next up, we have Islam Makhachev has literally popped. So I'm going to have to put him in this tier as well with his boy Usman Nurmagomedov. This was way back in the day. I think it was like 2016 where Islam popped for something. Again, does it mean he's on stuff right now? Not necessarily. Jones, for example, let me just go back to him. Does it mean Jones is on stuff now? Not necessarily. So, yeah, there's that. But I have to put him in this tier, okay? I definitely have to. Oh, my goodness. Here we go. Highly suspicious, once again. I'm going to put Mateusz Rebecki on this list. This guy has a lot of telltale signs. First of all, he's in his early 30s, and I know that some guys start balding when they're in their 20s, and that just could be genetic. But not only does he have a hairline that's holding on for dear life, it's basically non-existent at this point. And I love Mateusz Rebecki. He's one of my favorite fighters, and he has a lot of potential. One of the most interesting prospects in the UFC. But this guy's delts, his traps, his back, it's very saucy, all right? It's one thing, again, Arnold Allen versus Evloev. It's one thing if you're jacked like Arnold Allen, you have a wide frame. If you have a wide frame, that means you have a big structure to put a lot of muscle onto. For Evloev, he's like the smaller structure, but he's got tons of full, dry muscle that you wouldn't normally expect from someone that has a great gas tank. With Rebecki, phenomenal gas tank. Does have a wide frame, but again, his like shoulders and traps, they are really suspicious. I mean, he looks like he's very sauced up. Great gas tank, tons of power in his hands from the grappling world as well. And a lot of those guys in the grappling world probably take shit. The jiu-jitsu community is just littered with people that are on stuff. They don't even test. Next up, Edson Barboza. I might put Edson Barboza in the very suspicious tier, okay? Because on one hand, he's not that big. If you look at him in the cage, even though he's like very impressive. On the other hand, you see photos like this of him in the offseason. He's still shredded, but he looks twice as big as he is in the cage. I don't know. There's something going on with Edson Barboza, all right? His delts are capped. He has the 3D look. He's extremely dry and shredded all the time. Edson Barboza, if he was natty, listen, again, you can look like Edson naturally, but he's an MMA fighter that does all this cardio that happens to have like capped delts, and it's just a little bit strange. Next up, Conor McGregor. S tier. Conor literally admitted to being on sauce about a year ago. I don't remember the exact quote, but he basically admitted it on Twitter. I'll try to put it on screen right now. But Conor, we know after his injuries, leg injuries to be specific, that he had in the Dustin Poirier fights, took a lot of time off. And in order to recover as fast as possible, I'm sure he spent a lot of his hard-earned money on the best PEDs that money could buy. And the UFC also wasn't testing McGregor. He's not in the USADA pool. That's why everyone was making a big deal about how is he going to compete in December 2023 when he's not even in the pool yet? And then McGregor hopped in the pool. Is he in the pool right now? I'm not sure, but I know the UFC isn't even working with USADA right now. But the fact that he was out of the pool for so long, it's kind of obvious, especially if you pair that with him admitting it, literally. He didn't say word for word, I am on PEDs, but again, let me just put it on screen. That's pretty much admitting it. So Conor's in the S tier. Does it mean he's going to be on the sauce when he comes back? Not necessarily, but he's definitely on some shit right now. Next up, Michael Chandler. I'm going to put Michael Chandler in the very suspicious tier. Now, on one hand, he doesn't have a crazy gas tank, and it is pretty believable that someone could look like Michael Chandler naturally. And if he is an MMA fighter, he's kind of like Yoel, who doesn't have a crazy gas tank and usually gasses out hard. But at the same time, Michael Chandler is enormous for 155 pounds. He has a weird gut where you do tend to see people with that take a lot of HGH. They get like this distension in their gut. And then Michael Chandler, I mean, you just look at his physique. You look at his delts. He's just a little bit of a freak for that division. So my eyes are on Michael Chandler. I think that there might be something going on there. Next up, Dricus du Plessis. I might have to put him in the very suspicious tier. Like, Dricus du Plessis is one of the best gas tanks in all of MMA. He happens to be one of the biggest, most jacked middleweights that there is on the entire roster. He also happens to train in South Africa. I don't know if USADA loves going to South Africa. So there's that. I don't know, can one of you guys bring up an example of a fighter that's popped from that region? I'm not saying he's on stuff. I'm just saying having his gas tank to where he's not only keeping up a good pace over the course of 5 rounds, but he's also one of the only fighters that throws everything into his strikes. Like, he throws everything big to land hard. He overextends on his shots. He winds up, and he can do that for 5 rounds. And he also happens to be like massive for the middleweight division. So yeah, that's it. That's it for the tier list, guys. Now, let me once again clarify this. Edson Barboza, William Knight, okay? Some of the guys in the S tier even, Jailton Almeida, like, if they were just lifting and eating 5-6 meals a day and training hard and consistent, and they had insane genetics, I could see them being natural. Like, I understand that if you have great genetics, you can look really impressive, okay? But it's the fact that they compete at a really high level in mixed martial arts that is such a demanding sport as far as cardio and endurance goes, to where normally when you cut a lot of weight, which is really hard on your body, and you're training in an intense training camp and you're hitting pads hard and you're sparring hard and you're doing a bunch of cardio work, you would expect a look from some of these guys that's much less impressive. When I say things like stringy, I'm just talking about like their muscle would normally be a little bit more flat, because the cardio, it's not only that you're burning calories, but it's also just very stressful on your body. This is another thing that I want to bring up. A lot of people think of long distance running is something that's super healthy and it's fun, and running in general is pretty healthy because you're getting your heart rate up and all that. But anything to the extreme, like training camps at the highest level where you're just pushing yourself to the limits, there's a reason why MMA fighters are always talking about how they're basically worn out. They're running themselves into the ground. They're in pain during their training camp. They're fighting through injuries. So just think about all the stress on your central nervous system. Okay, think about all the stress hormones, the cortisol. Think about all of that shit. These guys are not in the optimal state to necessarily look as impressive as possible. You know what I mean? That's kind of what I'm saying. Like, these guys are not optimizing their physique, yet they all look insane nonetheless. They all look 10 times better than most people that just put all of their eggs in the one basket, being lifting weights, having a good physique. That's kind of where the alarm sounds. And then you look at guys with a crazy gas tank, and then you look at guys like Izzy with a boob. So everyone in the S tier is like, I pretty much know it. Like, I'm not 100% sure, but I'm pretty damn sure. Like, why would you grow a boob on one pec in your early 30s? And you happen to have the best performance ever, and you're the fastest and the hardest hitting you've ever been. Something going on there, right? And the same thing with Almeida. It's like you look at photos of him back in the day, super skinny, and his face is completely different. I know when you age, your face changes, but like his head has grown. His face has literally hardened. Like, it looks like he's calcified his face. I don't know. There's something going on there. Steroids happens to age you really fast. So there's that. And then there's everyone that has literally popped in the past. Once again, I just wanted to make this because I thought it was a fun idea. But I'm not the type of person that obsesses over this stuff because, you know, I honestly don't give a fuck at the end of the day. I really don't care that much. When I say things in my stream, if you listen to my live streams and I say Almeida's on that sauce, like, even though I'm pretty serious, I honestly, if he beats someone in the UFC, that's not what comes to mind. What comes to, well, actually, to be honest, in Almeida's case, him being juiced up is a reason for me to pick him, and it's definitely something to think about. So I actually take that back. I was about to say it doesn't really matter. It actually does matter. It actually does matter because this shit works. Okay? It works. Almeida is one of the strongest heavyweights. Look at him ragdolling Derek Lewis, for example. But I guess the point that I'm trying to make is, if Almeida becomes a champion, or if he beats a bunch of like these fat heavyweights, I'm not just going to sit there, cross my arms and pout and get upset about it. Like, this is the sport, bro. This is high-level athletics. At the end of the day, I just like watching stylistic matchups that are interesting. I like watching people that are really highly skilled, and I like watching fights. I like watching the best, most motivated athletes in the world compete against each other. And I'm sure a lot of these people are taking stuff. There's plenty of people in the UFC that are probably taking stuff that I would never be suspicious of. There are probably some people on this tier list that could be natural. Could be 100% natural. Especially these guys that have popped. Like, let me just say this about them. If you popped in the past, now you have a spotlight on you. Now everyone kind of brings it up, and it gives you a reason to not do that again. Like, shit, I can't pop again because then I'm really toast. And then I'm really going to stain my legacy for forever. For example, someone like Ortega, if Ortega becomes a champion, he popped way back in the day. No one's going to be like, yeah, he's a cheat and all this stuff. People are kind of going to forget about it. But if you've popped 2 or 3 times and then you become a champ, that could stain your legacy real bad. For O'Malley, all right, maybe he literally made a mistake and took a supplement that he shouldn't have taken. Maybe he wasn't careful enough. Maybe he did take something that he wasn't supposed to take and he knew it. Maybe he's never taken anything since. Maybe he knows that, shit, I'm pretty high profile now. I cannot afford to pop. Like, I cannot afford to not only be suspended for a few years and waste my career, but I just don't want that type of heat on my name right now, right? So they're probably extra careful. And if you're extra careful, that means that there's a lot of risks that you're probably not willing to take anymore. So my ultimate point is, I am suspicious that some of these people are on shit. Do I care that much at the end of the day? Not really. It is what it is. This is high-level sports. It's what you're going to get. But it's interesting to talk about. It's definitely interesting to talk about. But I do still respect all of these guys' skill sets. And I respect that, taking shit is not going to make you a champion. I totally understand that. Anyway, hope you guys enjoyed the video. Let me know what you think in the comments. Until next time.